טוב, מצוין, אז אנחנו יכולים להתחיל. ברוכים הבאים לדיון של ועדת המשנה ליחסי ישראל והעם היהודי. אנחנו היום נעסוק ביהדות בריטניה, ובמיוחד באתגרים שהקהילה היהודית בבריטניה נתקלת בהם בנושא של קיומה של בריטניה, קיומה של בריטניה כמוקד, כמקום מרכזי של פעילות אנטי-ישראלית, פעילות של דה-לגיטימציה של הציונות ושל מדינת ישראל. אנחנו היום המתכונת תהיה ככה, אנחנו נתחיל עם, בראשית הדרך עם האורחים שלנו, עם מיק דייביס, שהוא ה-chairman של UJIA, ארגון הגג, ושל ה-Jewish Leadership Council, ארגון העוד יותר גג של יהדות בריטניה. יחד איתו נמצאים ג'רמי ניומרק ודאג קרקלר, והם יפתחו במצגת המשמעותית יותר, הארוכה ביותר היום, בערך כ-20-25 דקות. אחרי זה יהיו עוד כמה מצגות קצרות של כמה ארגונים שביקשו להציג, ורק אחר כך נפתח את זה בהתחלה לתגובות משרדי הממשלה, ואז לכל מי שרוצה לדבר. אני מזכירה שמי שמבקש לדבר ולא נרשם למצגת מראש, נא להעביר פתק לדנה, מנהלת הוועדה, כדי לאפשר לכם לדבר. יש לנו שעתיים ככל שניתן, בדרך כלל כמעט כל מי שרוצה מספיק, יש שם נוכחות גבוהה, אנחנו ננסה ככל שניתן. אז אני מפנה למיק דייביס, כמובן מי שרוצה לדבר באנגלית מוזמן כמובן לדבר באנגלית, ונעשה זאת, אבל מי שיכול לדבר בעברית מתבקש לעשות שימוש בעברית. אז בבקשה מיק דייביס, ותודה שהגעת כל הדרך לוועדה, אנחנו שמחים לארח אותך פה.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And let me just say to you that we have a translated version of the slides. If anybody would like, we can hand out. There's a bunch over there, and Doug's happy to hand them out. The sort of agenda I want to talk about is really to contextualize the structure of the Jewish community, the risks facing the community, the realities of the London community. I've seen a lot of publicity recently about how embattled the UK is and how bad things are. Things are challenging, but they're not as bad as I read about. The diaspora community of Israel, and as well as the diaspora community in Israel, and I think some thoughts on how engagement can take place. I'm going to speak louder, all right? I shall try and speak louder. Just to make the point that, the creation of the State of Israel is clearly vested in the United Kingdom, and you don't need to be reminded about the Balfour Declaration, which is encapsulated in this letter. And even, let me say to you, on the 60th anniversary, you see a picture of a slide of Jews enthusiastically supporting the independence of Israel in Trafalgar Square. And you see in the following slide, more recently in Operation Cast Lead, the face-off of Jews in London protesting in favor of Israel and its right to protect its people against Hamas, who are on the other side of the road. So it is a community which not only is vested in Israel, but which stands up and is publicly seen in Israel. There's about 300,000 Jews in the United Kingdom. Most people in the United Kingdom, non-Jews in the United Kingdom, think we're about 10 million, but we're only 300,000. There are a number of small communities, but 75% of the community is actually in Greater London and its environment. So very, very concentrated. The next largest centre is Manchester. The community is made up of a number of different organizations, and I'm going to talk about this a little later, but the Jewish Leadership Council, which is almost like the Council of Presidents, Conference of Presidents of the United States, essentially is the home of all the major institutions which make up the Jewish community and which look after its welfare. And it's been formed to address and create a better organized environment to combat the hostile elements within the United Kingdom, which impact not only our community in a local sense, but impact our community in the context of how they actually view their relationship with Israel. The two central organizations of the community are the Jewish Board of Deputies, which essentially represents individuals. It's an elected body. It deals with immediate day-to-day issues affecting Jews in the country. and it's driven by its elected deputies, almost like the Jewish Parliament, and the Jewish Leadership Council, which facilitates collective action, essentially the long-term strategic big picture issues, and which is led by institutional concerns and which is made up of institutions themselves. The important part, I think, of this is that it represents a forum where a united view on the way forward can be achieved. Now, within the community framework and sitting within elements of the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council are a number of various elements. And the first element is government, politics, security and advocacy, which forms under that block. And there are a number of organizations which do work in that area, whether it's the Community Security Trust, the Trade Unions, Friends of Israel, BICOM, which I think you'll hear about from a little bit later, the various Zionist Federation, Fair Play, etc. Now, all these organizations fall under the coordinating umbrella of what's a body called the Political Oversight Group, which was established by the JLC, not to do people's work, but ensure that there's a collective strategy and, in fact, a common goal to which we are working towards. Add to that is the Israel dimension of that. So there are specific organizations devoted entirely to Israel. The UJA, which I'm chairman of, the various friends of organizations, friends of universities, the Jewish Agency is there, the JNF, Zionist Federation, and organizations from the left-wing Yachad to the right-wing Likud representation. In other words, it's quite a big umbrella of people who are involved in various aspects of Israel advocacy and work in Israel. An important component, clearly, obviously, of Jewish life. I then bring in the social welfare element of a community, where again a number of organizations looking after the Jewish aged, mentally challenged people, cancer people with learning difficulties, etc. And these make up the social welfare element of the community. And essentially what you're seeing here is a structure which came through from the ghettos of Eastern Europe, which essentially was replicated in British Jewry as Jews in their country became a more mature portion of the population. Moving into that, we then have aspects of the religious life, which is made up of a number of centralized synagogal bodies, the United Synagogue, the Reform and Liberal movements, the Spanish and Portuguese movement representing the Sephardim, and a very important element of that. And the point I need to make to you on these issues is that these generally are bodies which represent the vast number of Jews. Most Jews are members of some form of synagogal body in the United Kingdom. We then add to that the aspect of education, and we have a number of schools in the United Kingdom. Something like 75% of kids almost attend Jewish schools today versus 25% in the 1990s. A great success story in that, and also there's a vast array of youth movements which fall under the education centre. Zionist youth movements which form the backbone of Zionist education for young people, and a number of them visit Israel on formal trips organised through the youth movements.
I'll ask in English. The change in education from 25 to 75%, is that as a result of the British change of the system of allowing Jewish schools under public schools?
The British always supported faith schools. So the British always supported faith schools. The community never took advantage of it. And I think that over the last 15 to 20 years, you've seen two aspects take place. First of all, just on a purely secular basis, people took the view that they could get a better Jewish education, get a better education, secular education in Jewish schools than in non-Jewish schools, simply because of the concentration of talent. But secondly, that they sort of recognized that there was a value in a young Jewish person growing up in the security of people around him who shared a value system. And although they didn't separate them from the community, they believed, in fact, that if you gained a set of values within your formative years, you were better able to take your place in civil society with that level of confidence. And that's, I think, what has given rise to education.
What is the percentage in Jewish schools?
About 75%.
75?
Yes.
You would say 60.
It's because I have to include the Haredi schools in there as well.
Primary schools or
both primary and secondary, more in primary schools than in secondary schools. We then, of course, have arts and culture and media and various aspects like that which come into the frame. And so this makes up for you a very significant element of construct around the community, a very well-organized community, a very structured community, but at the same time you can see a plethora of organizations. There are something like 3,000 different charities in the Jewish charities in the United Kingdom. So although it is a strength on the one hand, it creates a sort of atomization on the other hand, and it's a huge cost, and let me tell you from my perspective, very difficult to manage.
Would you say that between all these organizations, they touch all 300,000 Jews, or are some not touched at all?
I would say that there are elements of those Jews who are not touched, who are separated from the community, in both on the extreme left-wing secular side and probably the extreme right-wing side of the community. But broadly speaking, I would say it touches the vast majority of the people within the United Kingdom. So what are the key risks facing the community? I mean, first and one which is foremost in your minds is the assault on Israel's legitimacy, which I'm going to return to later. Secondly, the first signs of an effective BDS boycott divestment campaign, which is having actual impact. And you will have seen recently an organization called the Co-op, which has basically ruled that it will no longer allow and facilitate goods which come from the settlements. And the Monte Crystal incident, where Monte Crystal was effectively invited and disinvited from carrying out mediation instruction within the UK. I have to say at this stage, this has been the exception rather than the norm. So although there has been a lot of activity around BDS, these are the first two real concrete incidents of great success that we've seen right now. It does actually create an issue of how quickly the community is galvanized to act in the immediacy of threats. And I'll come back to that a little later. The third aspect is government public spending cuts. You well know the challenges that all governments around the world face. In the United Kingdom, they are seeking to cut public spending and therefore threats to financing faith provisions, which was one of the great virtues of being Jewish in the United Kingdom, is that the state paid for a lot of your services. They paid for a lot of schooling, they paid for a lot of welfare, etc. And those are now under threat, which clearly creates a potential burden on the community itself. If one looks at the key risks in terms of social demographic issues as well, the age profile of our community is much greater than that of the normal secular community. There are twice as many 75-year-olds in the Jewish community as there is in the general community. And that clearly creates an issue in its own right. And the second one, which I think is worth noting, is the expanding Haredi birth rate, which is something which you understand well in this country, leading to the potential for serious poverty and deprivation in the Haredi community, which has a spillover onto the general community, Jewish community as well, in terms of how we actually deal with that issue.
Is it just a question of birth rate, or also levels of education and job?
Well, that's a good point. It's a question of all of that. You don't have the same level of non-participation in the workforce that they have, say in Israel, but there certainly is a significant element of the Haredi community who are not equipped to earn money, and that goes to both a norm in relation to the way they view how they should interrelate with sort of a secular life, but also in terms of education. But there's a paradox that despite these demographic challenges and the political challenges, which we're going to go into a little bit later, the UK community thrives both in terms of participation of Jews within Jewish activities, education, and activism. And although activism might not be at the level we'd like it to be, I can assure you it is at quite an effective level. I want to, however, before I get into the issues of risks, deal with some aspects of the myths. There are a lot of myths about UK Jewry at the moment. I must say to you, first of all, it is safe to walk the streets of London as a Jew, with a Jew wearing kippah, let me say. That there is campus extremism, and there's great assault on Jewish students on campus, and there is certainly a nexus between left-wing academia and the right-wing Islamic movements in the United Kingdom. which is both perverse and very worrying. But the position, in fact, I think has marginally improved on campus. I think the problems are more isolated, and I think the Union of Jewish Students creates a strong and effective buffer against that with some help from others. Let me just note to you that for the first time, the National Union of Students, which is the secular body, has elected a vice president who is Jewish in 2012. Holocaust education is part of the national curriculum, and the government is a very significant funder of Jewish day schools and healthcare. And I just give you an interesting statistic in terms of maybe misplaced veneration, but veneration nevertheless. That the Queen gets 5 minutes to give a Christmas message. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Church of England, has 10 minutes in the New Year. The Chief Rabbi gets 20 minutes for Rosh Hashanah. And that tells you something, perhaps, a little bit about the impact and how Jews manage to punch above their weight. And that's why some people I know think we're in the millions rather than the hundreds of thousands. I need to make another point, that there is regular institutionalized access to government. There's an annual meeting with the Prime Minister. I know of no other country in the world where Jews have a formalized, structured annual meeting with the head of state. There are ongoing meetings with various impacted ministries and a regular meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is actually no actual academic boycott right now within the United Kingdom. There have been many attempts and continued attempts to create one, but there's no actual boycott itself. And UK trade with Israel, in fact, is up over 34% last year, I think due in great measure to the work of the current UK ambassador in Israel. Various bilateral relationships, and these pictures show you these relationships as we go forward. But I have to say to you one other thing which I've noticed. I myself am a newcomer to the UK community. I come from South Africa, where one wears one's Jewishness more on your sleeve than perhaps traditionally in the United Kingdom. That over the last 5 years or so, there's been a new approach in the public arena. I no longer think you can accuse British Jewry of essentially being quiet to Jews. We try to do things subtly behind the scenes. I think they can be very much up in your face. We were the only community outside North America to run a salute parade for Israel and rally for Israel on the 60th anniversary of the State of Israel, with something like 50,000 people in London and Manchester. And that picture, which I'm going to show you now, is of the lighting of a Chanukiah, pretty large Chanukiah, outside the British Art Museum in front of Trafalgar Square in December last year. And I've already showed you this picture of the rally in Trafalgar Square of Operation Cast Lead. So it is a community which is prepared to stand up and be noticed and take a stand. It's also a community which I think has very recently played a vital role in the mayoral election campaign, leading to a swing against the Labour vote and facilitating the election of Boris Johnson as opposed to his opponent as the mayor of London. Let us talk about the assault on Israel's legitimacy. Let us be clear that the United Kingdom is a hub of delegitimization and is probably, in a sense, a hub of hubs. And let me say that I think that delegitimization comes into the UK and is, in a sense, exported out of the UK. And the reason why it's a hub of hubs is because the centre of the English language media and press, its geographical location is significant, its reach into its former colonies is significant as well. It is an arena of delegitimization which is essentially a grassroots-driven movement, very successfully between, as I said, the connection of left-wing academia and right-wing Islam. At the same time, it has great traction with the trade union movements as well. But I do want to make one distinction, and it's an important distinction, that there is a difference between delegitimization and people legitimately having issues with government policy in Israel. And it's important that we position ourselves in this debate to make sure that we don't cross this divide, because we then lose our credibility in fighting it. I need to make the other point, is that there is a large level of cooperation now taking place between various diaspora communities, as well as work undertaken by Yossi Kupavasa and others in forming a global partnership with global strategy to fight delegitimization. Our responses to this, in terms of the hub, is to recast London into a global hub fighting delegitimization. That is our intent, and that is where we want to get to. We want to develop a holistic response which is centrally coordinated but delivered at a local grassroots level, which is absolutely fundamental if we are going to win this battle. The Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, which is the most effective delegitimizer in the United Kingdom, is essentially a grassroots movement, generally not led by Palestinians, but led by former members of the Socialist Workers' Party and people who used to fight the anti-apartheid fight in the days of the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. There is a value in having the fight, even if we don't win, because every time we fight, we energize our community, and they actually take themselves forward. And the important thing here is to change is to recognize that there's a changing architecture that we need to create the right capabilities. We need to develop a capability of swift grassroots action, and that is a capability which is at the moment very much in its embryonic phase, and it's something which we're attending to right now. The other point that I need to make is that we have some distinctive strengths in some key areas. We are strong in national politics. We have the access and we have the ability to tone down and at times change the discourse. We have weaknesses in the churches, trade unions, and NGOs. But that's an area where we have plans and are working on action plans to address those right now with levels of engagement with those various facets of the community. I want to deal with now the issue of connectedness and peoplehood because it addresses the issue of delegitimization. The delegitimization of Israel is not just an Israeli problem. It's a problem of the Jewish people. Because what the delegitimizers attempt to do is essentially separate the Jewish people from Israel and to reverse what I think is a fundamental tenet of Jewish identity, the centrality of Israel to that identity. If they can separate the Jewish people in the diaspora communities from Israel, that is the success that they want to achieve. And that is the reason why connectedness and peoplehood is an important thing. I think you have to recognize that for young people growing up today, grappling and wrestling with their relationship with Israel is a very real issue. And our response is to try and create a space, or a big tent, let us say, where they can both love Israel and wrestle with some components of Israel which they find challenging. Not uniquely challenging in terms of other facets that they find challenging as they grow up and try to cope with life generally. Some of them are very common. Let me say to you, 82% from a recent survey of United Kingdom Jews say that Israel plays a central and important role in their identity. That's a great strength. 90% of them see Israel as their ancestral homeland. 95% of them have visited Israel.
Really?
76% see Israel as relevant to their daily lives. These are enormously satisfactory statistics. If I compare that to other diaspora communities, it gives us great strength and it gives me a great source of hope that we can actually crack this issue of delegitimization and keep future generations as strongly connected with their Jewish roots and with Israel as central to their identity as we have done in the past.
How do you explain, for example, the 95% who have visited Israel? I mean, this is an amazing number.
Because first of all, Israel is very close to the United Kingdom. It's a 4.5-hour journey.
But even compared to other communities in Europe.
Secondly, over 60% of young 16-year-olds visit Israel. We have, in terms of a summer tour, which is organized by the UJA, facilitated through the youth movements, over 60% of 16-year-olds, Jewish 16-year-olds, visit Israel. So at least 60% of them are doing one trip in their lives in any case. Many of them have family here, and many of them basically come here both for religious reasons and for cultural reasons. The next point I want to make to you is that 87% agree that Jews are responsible for ensuring the survival of Israel. And of the survival stat, 54% of UK Haredim, who are non-Zionists, actually agree with that statement as well, which is quite remarkable. 78% support the two-state solution, 14% are opposed.
From the right or from the left?
I don't know, but I assume that you can actually take it from the right as opposed to from the left. 72 support the security fence and saw Operation Castle as self-defense. Again, a very important statistic in terms of where they actually see themselves. Clearly, a large proportion are as worried about Iran being an existential threat to Israel as you are in this country as well. But at the same time, a significant majority thinks that Israeli politics is dysfunctional.
What did they think about British politics?
Well, today actually is a good question. You know, I have my own view about that, being a great supporter of the government, and I wonder how functional they are. 56% think that non-Jewish minorities suffer discrimination. 74% are opposed to settlement expansion. Now, whether you agree with their positions or not, you have got to understand this as a context in which the way they view their discourse with Israel, and one that, therefore, I come back to my perspective that you have to create an environment where they can actually deal with these issues, at the same time express unbelievable solidarity and action in support of the legitimacy of Israel as a nation-state of the Jewish people. And provided that is where their place is, they can have this debate. If their place is they're not prepared to support that, then that debate becomes less legitimate. So what are the nature of the relationship? It's a committed community. It's a concerned, committed community, and it's a community which wants to conciliate on issues which they find challenging. From my perspective, one of the great ventures that we did last year was the We Believe conference, where we, in fact, brought in over 1,000 people to get engaged in the tachlis of advocacy and engagement. And in that conference was both Jews and non-Jews. And the importance for us in our grassroots campaign is to ensure that we mobilize the non-Jewish component of Israel supporters to come out in support of Israel in the United Kingdom. I want to pose this key question, which I think is important in terms of understanding the connection of Israel and diaspora going forward. Are we one people? Are we a Jewish community which is one people separated by geography? And for me, this is a very big question. And it's a question in terms of how we deepen the connection. Because let me say to you, every hub of delegitimization should also be a hub of a big conversation. A conversation that takes place across the diaspora, and a conversation that takes place across the diaspora with Israel, which galvanizes diaspora communities against the wedge the delegitimizers are trying to open. That conversation really takes place, I guess, in some format. Daniel Taub, your ambassador, doing a great job in the United Kingdom with the Jewish Leadership Council. But I guess there are a set of responsibilities for the diaspora and a set of responsibilities for Israel. In the diaspora, we accept the responsibility and must accept the responsibility that the survival and the whole welfare of the State of Israel is as much our responsibility as it was when the state was first conceived and the project of building the State of Israel came into fruition, where the diaspora communities played such an important role. That support comes both in financial and political support for the State of Israel in our home countries, to engender that living connection amongst our young people going forward, that they separate from Israel, they drive a nail into the coffin of the death of their Jewish identity. And that our responsibility goes, therefore, with a robust and enduring engagement with Israel as a national homeland of the Jewish people. Israel has to be seen as a way to permeate institutional Jewish life. And diaspora communities in that conversation, however, must accept that the primacy of Israel's position on existential matters and security matters is absolutely fundamental. So our debate should not be to seek to second-guess how Israel views both its existential challenges and the existential challenges of the Jewish people. Our debate must be around how we actually facilitate that happening. That primacy is accepted and should be accepted by every diaspora community. In terms of the responsibility of Israel, I think Israel has a responsibility of facilitating this big conversation, to draw in diaspora communities and to allow a conversation where we speak amongst ourselves about ourselves. And that can be in both formal environments and informal environments. It can be environments where we have formalized networks of conversation organized in Israel. It can be environments which can be facilitated through multimedia. We must engender this big tent approach and promote the integrity of a people rooted in a set of values which we first brought as a Jewish people to the community of nations. If you can root it in a set of values, you will have every Jewish person in the diaspora firmly behind that connection. And that is what we need to try and do going forward. Our common responsibilities, I think, are to work together to manage the tension amongst young people, and I talk specifically of the United Kingdom, who have a desire to defend Israel and the Jewish people, while at the same time playing a full and active role in the internal Jewish debate about the best way to promote peace, recognizing the primacy of Israel on security and the primacy in Israel on the existential challenges. And the assault upon Israel's legitimacy, coming back to the point which I made earlier, is a threat both to Israel in its obvious sense, it's sort of Israel's next front in its war, but it's a threat to diaspora Jewry because it separates us from Israel in terms of identity and therefore must be tackled by both parties in common with each other. Both parties, I think, and I say this as somebody who's not particularly fluent in Hebrew, must tackle something which can unite the diaspora community in Israel in a very powerful way, and that is the language of the Jewish people. I was horrified when I first arrived at the United Kingdom to hear a conversation around a dinner table when somebody argued against Jewish kids learning Hebrew on the basis that was the language of Israelis and their language was English. Now clearly you must speak the language of your own country, but Hebrew is the language of the Jewish people. And I think it is a significant failure both in diaspora communities and a failure of Israel that we have not maintained the vitality and vibrancy of the Hebrew as a language of all the people around the world. And I think with modern technology we can do that today. And this is not a frivolous suggestion, it's an important suggestion. Because if people share language, they share a fate and they share a perspective of the future. So my conclusions for you today, and this is where I will end, is that we need to engage with the complexity of UK Jewry, that the hyperbole and the headlines which dominate the discourse in Israel about the UK often harm our community and their bilateral relationship. I think you must get a perspective. We challenge, we recognize the challenges, we do things about them, we need your help. UK Jewry is attempting to achieve best practice, and I think Jeremy plays a leading role in this, both in our community and in other communities in doing that. The big tent concept and the coalitions of support for Israel are important. The big conversation with the diaspora Jewry is fundamentally important. And for communities in the diaspora and in the community in the UK to deliver effective support for Israel, the voices of their leaders must also be heard within Israel. Thank you.
תודה רבה לך על מצגת מרתקת ומקיפה. אחת המטרות שבכלל אנחנו מקיימים את המפגש הזה, זה בדיוק כדי לענות לחלק מהשאלות של איך לקיים את השיחה, איך לדאוג שבכנסת ישראל מקשיבים לקולות של המנהיגות היהודית. לפני שאני אתן לעוד כמה מצגות, Jeremy, Douglas, do you want to add anything before we move forward? No. Okay. בסדר. אז Mick, I will have a few presentations and then I'd be happy to hear your response.
Absolutely.
Also with a couple of questions, and then we'll open it again.
Okay, I'm going to move back to my...
Okay. Michael Dixon, Israel Director, stand with us.
Thank you very much.
איפה? בבקשה.
חברי כנסת עינת Wilf, distinguished guests, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to say a few words.
Oh yes, התבקשתי להגיד, as to say, for the purpose of Israel National Radio, please speak loudly and clearly.
It will be my pleasure.
לדבר למיקרופון בצורה ברורה.
In the summer of 2006, Israel was under attack. In the UK, our hearts went out to those living under the terror of Hezbollah Katyusha rockets exploding on their homes. As we witnessed these scenes play out on our TV screens in the UK, the British pro-Israel community wanted desperately to express their solidarity with Israel. Eventually, a demonstration was convened, and supporters of Israel gathered together to rally for Israel. Although we gathered united for Israel, the venue seemed odd. Whilst Israel's enemies were taking to the streets of central London and other high-profile locations, this rally was held at JFS, the largest Jewish high school in Britain, indeed in Europe, where I worked at the time. The fences to the venue, the community's most secure location, were given an additional covering to avoid people looking in. My students, who were at that rally, were bemused and asked me why it was as if the message was, "We strongly support Israel, just don't tell anyone about it." Since then, there have been public rallies taken place in London, Manchester and other locations, and clearly security needs of the community are paramount. But to me, it demonstrated an unease that existed then and has only grown amongst British Jews as they take the temperature of the anti-Israel climate in British society. We can argue that bilateral trade between Britain and Israel is flourishing to the tune of £3.7 billion, that Israeli technology is highly utilised by leading British companies, that tourism is booming with well over 170,000 visitors from the UK last year. but this is to ignore the worsening tone of public discourse in Britain about Israel. And the problem is serious. At the National Union of Students conference last month, the Union of Jewish Students store was vandalized, the Magen Davids defaced. When a Jew protested yet another anti-Israel event at the SOAS University in London, he was attacked with a bite to the cheek. At the university formerly attended by Prince William, 2 students racially intimidated a Jewish student, grabbing his Israeli flag, urinating in his sink, and calling him a Nazi. In the last month alone, the Co-op supermarket chain boycotted 4 Israeli companies, and Moti Cristal, an expert on conflict resolution, was banned from a National Health Service conference just because he is Israeli. Indeed, the tone of many media articles and discussions on Israel is not why boycott Israel, but why not. These are just some of the many recent incidents that should galvanize us to do more, because lies are being told about Israel in the UK every day. And these lies rebound across public debate, and particularly across university campuses, and gain traction around the world because of the prominence of British media globally. Indeed, the National Union of Students Hate Crime Interim Report of 2011 cited that 31% of Jewish students surveyed reported being victimized for their religion on British university campuses. We must fight back against lies and misinformation of dedicated anti-Israel groups. Silence is not an option. We must not allow lies about Israel to exist in a vacuum and to go unchallenged. Before speaking with you today, I turn to the outstanding pro-Israel student leaders, both Jewish and non-Jewish, that form the Stand With Us UK Fellowship, based on 11 campuses across Britain, including York, UCL, Manchester, Birmingham, Oxford, Cambridge, LSE and others. I asked them what they need to fight back against those promoting an anti-Israel, pro-boycott agenda. And their response was clear. More materials, more resources, more activism and empowerment to help them learn more so that they can teach more. Young Jews in Britain do feel a connection to Israel. They are proud of Israel. They support Israel and they visit Israel. Their support for Israel is not a left-right issue. They need us to empower them with education, to lead by example, and to take a public and proud stand for Israel in Britain. Most British people are not anti-Israel. We need to reach out to them and demonstrate our shared values and show them what Israel has to offer them, building a coalition of support for UK-Israel relations among the Christian community, minority communities, and yes, among brave, moderate Muslims. Unfortunately, and for many years, there has been a strategic underinvestment in real pro-Israel grassroots action in the UK. In the meantime, as the Reut Institute study showed, there has been a rapid growth of anti-Israel organizations networking together. Tragically, there are also occasions when pro-Israel activity is hindered by our own side, as we found recently. We organized a nationwide UK tour of an amazing British pro-Israel Muslim speaker, Qasim Hafiz, entitled "The Day I Stopped Hating Israel." His recent article in Ynet has been shared online more than 15,000 times. We were disappointed and ashamed that a small number of UK Jewish leaders attempted to block this tour for fear of inflaming the campus atmosphere, which, in the end, it took place and did not. How could a moderate, sane, Muslim voice on Israel be seen as anything other than a positive and strengthening influence on debate? My organisation, Stand With Us, via its office in London, and others who are doing valuable grassroots pro-Israel work, are committed to pushing back and forging a positive agenda via speaking tours, educational materials, campaigns, Buy Israeli Goods Days, and real online initiatives. We are vocally challenging lies while putting forward the positive agenda for Israeli-British relations. Now more than ever, ordinary people have more power and influence at their fingertips than any other time in history. The internet may allow lies to spread quicker, but our clever, sophisticated and strategic use of social media allows us to organize and engage more people with Israel than ever before. We must invest in and strengthen these grassroots efforts. This weekend, when Habima actors perform at Shakespeare's Globe in London, having been targeted by the anti-Israel boycott groups, we will be there to welcome them, both in the audience and outside the venue. This is an on-the-ground effort that we are proud to be part of. And as we reach out to more and more people, every time we are called on to stand up for Israel, with our heads held high, more people will do so. Thank you.
תודה רבה, מייקל דיקסון, גם על המצגת והדברים החשובים האלה. אני מבקשת עכשיו את דרמט, קאו, ה-CEO של בייקום, וג'ונתן קומינגס, if you want to add anything later. בבקשה.
Good. Sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'm very pleased to be here. It is almost exactly 20 years to the day since I first came to the Knesset on a young political leaders trip. I was a non-Jewish vice president of the National Union of Students and came over on a Union of Jewish Students trip. I got to see Israel firsthand, and not only was I convinced intellectually of the case for Israel, but also emotionally, and they won both my heart and my mind. So I'm particularly honoured to be back here 20 years later as the new chief executive of BICOM. But this is the website where many of you may know us from. BICOM, the Britain Israel Communications and Research Centre, is an independent British organisation which aims to foster the Britain-Israel relationship and ultimately create a more supportive environment for Israel in Britain. We have offices in both London and Jerusalem. Our work is based on the principles of a belief in Israel's right to live with peace and security as both a Jewish and democratic state, and a strong belief that the Britain-Israel relationship is based on shared interests and values on both sides. Our organisation was established and is supported by the Jewish community in the UK, who, because they care very much about how Israel is perceived, we are members of the Jewish Leadership Council and work very closely, strategically with them. But also because the Jewish community care more widely about what the people of the UK think about Israel, and they have a fair and accurate picture. I also think it's very important that Britain matters more than that. I think Britain matters on a global stage. People have touched upon this before. Britain still punches above its weight. The empire may be gone, but certainly London as a centre, as a financial and cultural and media centre. Some of the biggest media brands on the globe are based in London. The UK remains a member of the Security Council of the UN. It's a large and significant member of the EU, the Commonwealth connection, which was mentioned before. Britain matters not only in the UK and in Europe, but globally. And there are some positives. I'll come on to negatives, but let's not forget there are positives in the UK-Israel relationship. There is, and there has been, through successive governments, good cooperation at the strategic level. Currently, in terms of the threat from the Iranian nuclear programme, there is good cooperation between the governments and a broad and a recognition of that threat. There is also, both with elites and with the UK public, a broad recognition of the of the threats that Israel faces, particularly from Hamas, from Hezbollah, and from Iran. That is largely understood. There's also, as touched upon on a practical level, there's been an impressive growth in trade, reaching record levels in last year and growing by a third. And there is also, on the positives, there is a mainstream consensus against the delegitimization agenda. The quote up above is by Ed Miliband, who's the Labour leader of the opposition in the Parliament, and something we're very keen to do is set up a firewall between mainstream opinion and that of the delegitimizers. But as we know, there are areas for concern. There is an active delegitimization network. It's real, and we take it seriously. Although it is small, the people there are very highly networked, they're very highly motivated, and they're very active. And that's something I've been touched on before. There's a general public coolness towards, cooling towards both Israel and the Palestinians. An important point I'll come back on within Britain and the UK and how they see the issue here. It's very much as an outsider for the general UK public. There are frictions in the bilateral relationship at a government level over the peace process, and especially, as you will know, over the issue of settlements. There's some scepticism, growing scepticism, about Israel's willingness to make peace, which is damaging for Israel's reputation. And explicitly, the support for Israel's legitimacy is linked to having a peaceful solution. Where BICOM comes in is we are a centre for expertise on Israel in the UK. We provide a daily news summary. We provide regular analysis. We talk to journalists constantly. We bring journalists from the UK over to Israel to see firsthand what's here, to repeat some of the experience that I had 20 years ago. The best advocacy for Israel is Israel itself. We also bring Israeli voices over to the UK, expose them to journalists, to opinion formers and to policymakers, and we maintain a constant dialogue at the opinion former and media level. And as I mentioned, we work very closely with the JLC and the Jewish community within the UK. One of the things we do is to gather data, polling data, with our organisation Populous. We have 10 years of polling data now to go back on, and I want to take you through just a couple of slides on that to illustrate where I think the UK public is on this issue. This slide here is measures the warmth the UK public has towards both Israel and the Palestinians. And what this slide, I believe, what I want to illustrate with this slide is that views towards both rise and fall together over a period of time. If public attitudes cool towards the Israelis, it doesn't mean they're supporting the Palestinians, and vice versa. This is not a zero-sum game. It's perceived about the behaviours that's happening within the region. The second one is from our latest poll, which is who do the UK public blame for not settling the dispute. As you can see, a small number blame the Palestinians, a slightly larger but still small number blame the Israelis, but well over two-thirds blame both sides, as in a plague on both your houses. This slide here, there's a lot of information on here, but what I want you to take away from this are some arguments we've tested, again, over the years, to deploy with the UK public and with opinion formers about convinces people to become more supportive and warm towards Israel. The two key arguments that make the most traction are that Israel has offered to give up large areas of its land in the pursuit of peace, and secondly, that Israel is a vibrant democracy. And again, as when I came here 20 years ago, to experience Israel democracy firsthand and the vibrancy of Israel's culture is really one of the most persuasive arguments that can be deployed. And the final piece of data I want to share for you is about support for Israel as a Jewish state. About 1 in 5 of the UK public support the right of Israel as a Jewish state unconditionally. That's obviously much larger than the UK Jewish population. It's about 1 in 5. A smaller number, less than 10%, less than 10, do not support the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state under any circumstances. A very small minority. The plurality, almost half, basically make support for a majority Jewish state conditional on an agreement being reached between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The mainstream British opinion on this is one of looking to sue Israel and the Palestinians to resolve their dispute, rather than the agenda solely of delegitimization, although it exists and it's real and we need to tackle it. So, in conclusion, two things I want to say. In terms of organisationally and strategically how BICOM is seeking to deal with this issue, broadly on 3 levels. First of all, on an intellectual level, we need to engage directly with those who seek to give respectability to the views of delegitimization, who do not recognise the right of Israel and the Jewish people to have a homeland in the land of Israel. BICOM is launching in the autumn a journal. It'll be an intellectual journal. It's going to be an app on your iPads and your iPhones and your Android phones. You should all get it. You should all read it. And additionally, many of the people in this room are becoming to contribute to it. We have to refer to the academic and intellectual left. We have to engage on that level. Secondly, there's the regular ongoing engagement with media, opinion formers and policymakers. The work that BICOM has been doing for 10 years in terms of bringing people here, bringing Israelis to BICOM, exposing people to the policymakers. And for example, I believe, Madam Chairman, you're drafting an article for us, which we seek to place in the UK media next week on the Habima issue raised before, and to work on that level as well. And so, indeed you are. So that's the work we've been doing and continue to do. And the third level, which Mick referred to, and I want to echo and support everything Mick was saying and the previous guy from Zone with us about delegitimization and our analysis and how we should engage with it, is that we believe in Israel. We are fully supportive of We Believe in Israel and seek to support that on a strategic and practical level. And that's about getting in and doing some of the advocacy, some of the grassroots stuff. And BICOM seeks a role there in terms of tooling them, supplying them with collateral, providing them with strategic advice, so we can get down on that third level to engage in the civil spaces, in the organisations where they seek to make traction. It's a full spectrum from the intellectual right down through to the advocacy. And just in conclusion, so that's the strategy. And in terms of the arguments, because at the end of the day, this is about winning an argument. And again, to echo what the JLC said, winning the argument is important. Taking part in the argument is important. And not just should we see London and the UK as a threat, but it's an opportunity to win the argument. And we're gearing up and geared up to do that. The primary one is to demonstrate that Israel wants peace and prepared to make compromises. And it has done so before, and this can be demonstrated. Secondly, I think it's vital to isolate the delegitimizers and BDS, to expose them of the enemies of peace. That's what's going to win over the centre ground, to create these firewalls between the extreme and the delegitimizers and what constitutes mainstream legitimate debate. To remind people of the threats that Israel faces. It is appreciated the situation that Israel's in terms of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran in particular. To tell the story and retell the story of Israel and of Zionism and of the Jewish people's legitimate right for a homeland in the land of Israel. And finally, that Israel remains a democratic society that people can relate to, that has shared values. And in terms of where you come in and this committee comes in, is working with us. As I said, the greatest advocates for Israel are Israelis themselves. We'll be coming to you to do more stuff, more writing for the UK media, to meet our delegations when we bring them out here, of policymakers and opinion formers. We want to bring Israelis out to the UK and have this engagement directly. So thank you very much.
Thank you. תודה רבה לך, דרמוט מפייקום. ועכשיו עוד שני דברים קצרים. סטיוארט פלמר מכוכב, בבקשה.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Kochav is an organization that was set up 10 years ago to maintain connections with over 100 groups in many countries around the world. Many of them are British origin, and behind me we have quite a number of British representatives, and particularly the British Israel group, who keeps connections at grassroots level. It's very encouraging to listen to what Mick Davis and the people from BICOM are saying, but we are looking at the peak of a pyramid of the distribution of population. The problem is that the Palestinians have turned this pyramid the other way round, and they are working from the bottom up. And we're finding time and time and time again that people are faced with situations that they don't know how to handle. I just give one classic example of two doctors from Charing Cross Hospital that came across to a village in Judea and wrote a 7-page article in the Lancet criticizing an appropriate settlement, Jewish settlement, that had stolen land from this Arab village. This journal goes to doctors worldwide. And if we hadn't responded to this, then many doctors would have believed this to be the truth. Fortunately, we have amongst our volunteers a number of active people, international lawyers, and we were able to challenge this and got a 7-page response published in the journal, which resulted in a dialogue. But this is the sort of thing that happens at grassroots level. It happens at schools, it happens in professions, it happens in the trade union movement. We find it necessary to have a helpline so that people will write to us and say, look, I'm going to a conference on, for example, just recently in a church in the north of England, the inhumane treatment of Israeli soldiers at checkpoints. We were able to provide 10 people in a congregation of 240 people with some sound bites to be able to put to make the audience think. And in fact, they were the only ones that asked the questions. Nobody else did. So the helpline is important. We got to know about this conference, Madam Chairman, literally just 48 hours ago. We have a number of ideas where we feel that we would like to suggest and present some help. And with respect, we'd like to actually email this to you as a separate report at a later stage.
בשמחה.
Thank you.
תודה רבה, ולבסוף אנדרו בלקון מהזיוניסט פדריישן. איפה?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to compliment Mick Davis on his. I'd like to compliment Mick Davis on his presentation, but I think, Madam Chairman, you should understand from an activist point of view that that speech would have been terrific 5 or 10 years ago. That the activism today is different, in my view, than has been expressed, because sitting at the top of the JLC, they're maybe 27 levels above what is actually going on the ground. The Zionist Federation was asked to join the GLC, and it didn't for various reasons. But I didn't hear the word anti-Semitism mentioned in the entire presentation, and I think it's fair to say that you should know that there are divisions in the leadership of the Jewish community as to the relationship with Israel. It's very difficult from the Zionist Federation's point of view, where, for example, the UJIA did not support Yom Ha'atzmaut celebrations because they were, quotation marks, political. It's very difficult when we don't hear much about the BBC, which is inherently anti-Semitic, and I say that. I had a meeting with the head of news of the BBC who said to me, the problem is the power of the Jewish lobby, and to this day I regret not having walked out. It's also very difficult to understand that The Guardian today can publish an article on the Jerusalem Light Rail calling Jerusalem the capital of Israel, then issues an apology saying Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel, Tel Aviv is. That is then queried with the Press Complaints Commission, who uphold the fact that Tel Aviv is the capital of Israel. And I don't know what the community has done about that. Our view of UJS, which has an extremely difficult time on campus, as Michael has said, is that they have extraordinary difficulties. That was not mentioned, the legal actions that we believe should be taken against some of these perpetrators. For example, the Zionist Federation has great difficulty in renting halls for events. And in a particular case, we were cancelled, we had to move it, and then we sued and got damages. And there should be more of a focus on the legal remedies available to people when they are subjected to the sort of pressures and trespass that are going on with Israeli goods and Israeli meetings. And finally, the support that we can expect should be developed in ways that haven't been developed. The Christian Friends of Israel are extraordinarily effective, but get very little support other than at grassroots level. Similarly, the Hindus, we do have assets that we don't develop as well as we can. And finally, in terms of the divisions of the community, there have been great difficulties with this. As Mick knows, he gave a speech that a lot of people have not forgotten, in which he said, one of the many things that were said, I think the government of Israel have to recognise that their actions directly impact on me as a Jew living in London. When they do good things, it's good for me. When they do bad things, it's bad for me. And the impact on me is as significant as it is on Jews living in Israel. I want them to recognise that. And after his speech talking about the primacy of Israel and the views of the JLC, I'd like him to comment in relation to the comments he made earlier. Thank you, Madam Chairman.